I'm so excited to have you here today to do this really fun knit sweater. This is a summer sweater with some lace work. I am absolutely loving it. Today I'll be using the Comfy Fingering Weight yarn from Knit Picks. It's 218 yards and 50 grams. And this is in color white. And this is a 75% Pima cotton and a 25% acrylic. I think there are a lot of fingering weight yarns. You could even try merino that would work for this sweater. I like the drape of this comfy cotton, so I went with that. This is a swatch for you to see where we are headed with this. This is the main pattern of our sweater. You will also be needing a size 6 4mm needles, and I prefer to have them on a minimum of 24 inches. I know this one's a bit shorter because when we're working this flat, we're going to be working from the bottom ribbing up to underneath the arms, and then we're going to expand out for the arms and work a hole for the neck, and then repeat working back down the other side. So there are some areas that are quite a bit of length when you add in those sleeves. So the circular needle set with some extra cord length is a great idea for this pattern. You'll also need a couple of stitch markers, a tapestry needle, and some scissors. So today I'm going to get started by talking about this swatch so that we can get that established stitch pattern repeat down. For this stitch repeat, it is a 4-row repeat, but rows 1 and row 3, which are the wrong side of the pattern, are simply purl rows. So I won't be demonstrating the purl rows since those are quite simplistic. So the first row would be a purl row. For row 2, we will start by doing a knit 1, and then pay attention to what comes next because this will be our repeat for the row. We are going to knit 3, yarn over. I like to hold this yarn over for this next section because we will be slipping the next stitch knitwise, knitting the next 2 stitches together and taking those off the needle, and then passing that slip stitch over the knit 2 together. So that is a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass a slip stitch over. Then we will yarn over and repeat. So our repeat is to knit 3, do a slip 1, we'll first do a yarn over, and then we'll do our slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over. So yarn over, then we will do a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass that slip stitch over, and then another yarn over, and that is our repeat for the row. We're going to do that one more time. We will be doing a knit 3, yarn over, slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over, and yarn over. Complete that for the end of your row. Now these stitches, when you're doing your gauge swatch, they will be cast on. You can cast on in multiples of 6 plus 2. You probably don't need one as wide as mine, so you can just do it a little bit less wide. You just want to see if your gauge is right with these needles. And as we come to the end of this row, we will do our last slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over, yarn over to finish up that repeat, and then you'll have 1 stitch left, and that stitch is to simply knit. And now we're going to turn, and for row 3, we will simply do a row of purls. Now for row 4, it's very similar, it's just we're starting it off a little bit different. We're going to start off by knitting 1, doing a yarn over, doing a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over, yarn over, and knit 3. So once again, the repeat for this row is to yarn over, slip 1, knit 2 together, pass that slip stitch over, yarn over, and knit 3. Repeat those steps till the very last stitches. So we're ending our repeat here by knitting 3, and then we will have 1 stitch left and we will simply knit that stitch. And that's the 4-row pattern repeat for this pattern. Now I've already worked up the front body of this sweater. You will start by creating a 2x2 rib on the bottom. Now for some sizes, just the way the sizing works out, you will start with a knit 2, purl 2, and then end with a knit 2, which is fine. It will work out, I promise. I've detailed that in the written pattern. So you'll do a 2x2 ribbing, and then you're going to work your body rows. This will work up until the point where we will add the sleeves, so until your underarm part. For all the sizes, I have made this to be 12 inches when it's blocked, which is 72 rows. If you would like your sweater to come down farther or be more like a crop top, you can increase or decrease those pattern repeats in rows of 4. I also want to note that, I don't know if you can see it on camera, probably not. I have these tiny strands of thread. This is just sewing thread. I find it's really easy to use. I place lifelines. Lifelines are a great idea. They just sit in between your stitches here, and then if you have to drop a stitch, you're just fine. And I'll rotate my lifelines up and across here. So I feel that lifelines could save you a lot of grief, just in case your piece gets picked up by a child or a pet, or you happen to drop a stitch. It really can save you time in not having to do as much fixing. For the size that I'm demonstrating here is the size small. So for the size small, I have worked this in a width of 74 stitches. And now it is time for me to add in my arms. Now I've included 2 arm lengths in this pattern, one for more of a quarter length that goes just below your elbow, or for long sleeve. I would like to make a long sleeve one, so I'm going to be starting there. This is where it is nice to have 2 sets of needles if you happen to. I have these needles as well from Knit Picks. I love the Knit Picks rainbow set. It's great, especially because if you buy the set, it comes with a lot of awesome things like these connectors in order to make your cords even longer. So now that we have done these rows, it is time for us, I've done row 1 through 4, it is time for us to fasten off. The reason why we're fastening off is because we are going to be adding on to each side for the sleeve since this is worked flat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn with the wrong side facing, because this is what I would be continuing working if I were to just start knitting again. We are on a wrong side. We are going to be on row 1. And for this, we will be purling. But before we purl across here, I have gone ahead and I have done a long tail cast on for 74 stitches. This is for the long sleeve. For a quarter length, you would be doing 42 stitches. So this will be what we will work across when we are on the next row. This will be one side of our arms. Then I'm simply going to start working from here. If you don't have a second set of needles, you can place this onto a stitch marker and work it from the stitch marker. So now I'm going to be purling across the body. So I've casted on 74 stitches with the thumbtail cast on, and now I'm simply going to work across these body stitches by purling. And now that I've worked all those stitches across the body from purling, I can get rid of that extra set of needles or stitch marker, and now we're going to need to add stitches to the other side for the other sleeve. So I will once again thumb cast on 74 stitches. So now that we've got our extra stitches casted on to the left and right of the body, we are going to go ahead and start working in our repeats. However, just because the way this works out, we're not going to continue to row 2. We are actually going to skip to row 4. It's just the way that it works out when we add extra stitches left and right to make sure that the pattern lines up across the body. So start in this on row 4 of the established stitch pattern, working all the way across these arm stitches and body stitches, and then we will continue our established stitch pattern for a total of 42 rows for the size small. So work on that, and then I'm going to come back and show you what that looks like. So now I've gotten to this part so I can kind of give you a better visual of where you're headed in terms of adding the sleeves. So to recap, we casted on 72 stitches, and then we knit across that body, and then we casted on another 72 stitches for the long sleeves. So this looks kind of funky right now that this is going to be a top, but I promise it will turn out great. So now I've done this section. Now this section for the first part of the sleeve is a total of 44 rows for the size small. Depending on what size you're working on, that will be in a different amount, but for the size I'm demonstrating, I have worked 44 total rows from casting on for those sleeves. And now it's time for us to create the opening for the neck. So we're going to be placing some stitches onto a stitch holder or scrap yarn for this row, and let me show you how we do that. It's very similar for all sizes, but we're going to talk about stitch counts for the size small. So working in that established stitch pattern, I'm going to be working the first 86 stitches of this row. I've gone ahead and placed a marker after 86 stitches just because as I'm working, I don't like to have to count the whole time. It's nice to know when to stop. So I highly suggest doing that. So I'm going to work these first 86 stitches. So now that I've come to my stitch marker, I can go ahead and remove it. But all the stitches in between till my next stitch marker, which for this size will be a total of 46 stitches, I will be going ahead and binding them off using just a basic bind off. So I'm going to bind off the next 46 stitches. At that point, we can go ahead and place this first section onto a stitch holder. And I also want to note that I'm not working these 46 stitches in any type of stitch pattern. I'm simply doing a basic knit bind off. Now that I've come to my next stitch marker, I can remove it, bind off that very last one to make sure all 46 are bound off. And now I'm going to work this section, this left side, in the established stitch pattern as well. But just to make it easy for me, I'm going to take a second and pause and put these stitches onto a stitch marker. I'm just going to slip that stitch back to my needle and place this section onto a piece of scrap yarn is what I'm going to be doing. So working in my stitch pattern, I am continuing to work row 2 of my established stitch pattern on this left side. So we're still working our row 2 all the way across, but we did bind off some stitches. So really pay attention to the stitches that you're working, continuing them in that established stitch pattern. Then we will do 14 more rows, still working in our pattern on each side here. So work this after completing this row 2, work 14 more rows, and then come back to this side. You will be starting on row 3 of our established stitch pattern. When we attach our yarn, we will be attaching on the wrong side because we will be purling across for row 3, and then we are going to work we're going to work a total of 14 rows beyond this point. And then we will come on back where we will cast on some stitches and join the sides together again. So now we can kind of start to see our sweaters taking a bit of shape with the front. We've started our arms, and now we can see where we've created the first part of this neck opening. I went ahead, when I finished this side, I left it on my second set of needles kind of as a stitch holder, and then I worked this other side. So now we have both sides worked, and this is 16 total rows in instruction, but 14 rows after we did this bind off. So we're leaving some space for our head. Now I've ended each of these rows on a right side row. So for this next set of instructions, we will be adding some thumb cast on stitches here to go ahead and create the back part of this opening, but we will be starting on the wrong side working across. So let's go ahead and start there. So I've gone ahead and I have joined my yarn again, and now I'm going to purl across for this row, and then when we get to the neck opening, we will be casting on some thumb stitches. All right, now that I've worked across this first section, now I'm going to go ahead for the size small and cast on 46 thumb cast on stitches. So just that easy thumb cast on, and we're going to cast on 46 stitches. And then after casting on 40 stitches, I'm going to take my stitches that I've got sitting on these other set of needles, and if you didn't have another set, you can always take the set you're using and place them onto this long loop strand. But I'm fortunate enough to have the second set. It comes in handy. And so now they've been using them as a bit of a placeholder for this, and now I can simply purl across the other side as well. So now we are back to the same stitch count we were when we started the sleeves, and we are going to do the exact same amount of rows. So this is row 1 of our back section. We're working row 1 of our established stitch pattern, and for the next row we're just going to work row 2 of our established stitch pattern. So we'll continue working this for a total of 44 rows, which is the same amount we had before we did the neck area. So go ahead and work in pattern across both sleeves and across these stitches that we just cast on for the back part of the neck, and do so for 44 rows. So now for the size small that I have worked the same amount of stitches on this side of the neck back as I did on the front neck before the neck opening. It is time for us to bind off some stitches because we are done with the space we need for the sleeves. So the way this looks right now flat does look kind of funny. We have our front here with our ribbing that we're currently looking at the wrong side of this fabric, and we have our sleeves out here, which I'm doing the long sleeves. So when I'm doing the long sleeves, I'm going to go ahead and bind off 72 stitches just in a basic bind off, starting with this row 1. If I were working in a short sleeve, it would be 42 stitches, but for a long sleeve I'm going to be doing 72 stitches. So this way we're going to no longer be working these sleeve stitches and go back to just working the width as we did on the front. So I'm just going to use a basic bind off here. This is going to become a seam when we are ready to seam this top together. But for now, since I don't need anything too fancy, I'm just going to simply do a bind off in the purl style, where I simply purl first stitch and then the second stitch, and then I pass the first purl stitch over. And I just keep doing that all the way across. I'll purl, pass the first stitch over. And I'm going to do that for a total of 72 stitches for the long sleeve. So after binding off 72 stitches for the long sleeve, now I'm going to go ahead and simply purl 74 stitches. This will be the back body. And now after purling the body stitches, it's time for us to go ahead and purl bind off the other arm, so the other 72 stitches left on this piece. And once we've done that, we will go ahead and fasten off our yarn and concentrate on the back body stitches only. And now that we have the arm stitches, they are all bound off. And now we are back to working our live stitches, and we are just working this back body section. Now if you have these corded needles like I do, these circulars, you can go ahead now and get rid of some of that length if you would like, to make it a bit easier, because we don't need as much length since we're no longer working the sleeves. So now it's time to work this in pattern. I'm going to start with my row 2, and I'm going to work these back body stitches in pattern. I will be working them for the exact same number of rows that we did on the front here. And so that means I will be doing a total of 72 stitches counting this row that we just did. So we're starting on row 2 of our established stitch pattern. Once we do that, I also will come back for the ribbing. So go ahead and do the 72 rows in pattern for that back body. Now I've worked the back length of the body, and then I ended with the ribbing again. This ribbing is 11 rows, just like it was when we started on the front side, only when I started the ribbing on the back, I started it on a wrong side row. And that way I'm ending with purl stitches on each side, which will be a nice transition when we seam to the knit stitches on the front side. Now the thing about this next is this really will start to take shape. I went ahead and blocked this last night. I always suggest blocking before any type of seaming. Yes, it still does have some curl, but it's a knit thing. It will always have some curl even after blocking. However, what will happen next, we'll take out the rest of that curl. So as we fold this in half with the right side facing right now, we'll notice that now it really takes shape and it looks like a really nice summer top sweater. So the next thing we will do is we'll take our tapestry needle and we're going to grab some thread. We're going to weave in any extra ends right now. We don't need all those tail ends hanging out. And we're going to seam from the bottom, up the side, underneath the arm, and then all the way down the arm to the cuff. So this way on each side, go ahead and do that. We're going to seam from the sides to the underarm and back down the arms, and that will join it as a sweater that we can actually try on. I'm going to go ahead and do some seaming, and then we will come back for the neck ribbing and the cuff ribbing. Now that we've got this beautiful knit sweater seamed from the arms down to the sides, it looks like a sweater. So this is really starting to take shape. The remaining things we need to do are the ribbing on the bottom of the sleeves, because right now they're pretty wide. If you prefer that, you can leave it as is if you don't want to do the ribbing. And then we need to do some ribbing around the top part of this. So we're going to start with the sleeves. So we're going to grab our circular needles. We will be working this in the round. Grab your yarn, and then we're going to be picking up stitches. So I like to hide any type of join at a seam. So I'm going to be starting picking up stitches at this seam, and I will be picking up about 1 stitch per row. For the sleeve, I like to join my yarn at the seam underneath the arm. The reason why is it's an inconspicuous space to weave in that end when you're ready to weave in this beginning end, and also just to hide any type of inconsistencies. So I'm going to join my yarn, and then I want you to notice I have a stitch marker halfway between, if I were to fold my sleeve in half, to mark the halfway point. This is because I find it easier to pick up stitches when I can visually see the halfway point. I want to do 44 stitches all the way around the end of the sleeve, which means I need to do 22 stitches from my starting point to the halfway point. It just helps me keep that picking up stitches a bit more even. Now, the most important thing when picking up stitches around the edge of this is that it's divisible by 4. That way we can continue in the 2x2 ribbing just like we did on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to pick up 44 stitches all the way around the edge of this sleeve. Now that I've picked up 44 stitches, it's time for us to work 7 rounds in that 2x2 ribbing. So I will knit 2, purl 2, and continue that all the way around, and we are going to be doing this for 7 rounds. So this will be working in the round for these sleeves, and I am using what's called the magic loop method, where I've basically folded my piece in half on these needles, and I work across the front half, and then I turn and work across the back half. It's a really nice way to work in the round. It's my favorite way to work in the round. But you can use DPNs if you are more comfortable with those. So come on back when you've done 7 rounds of 2x2 ribbing, and then we will bind off. Now it's time to bind off. So I'm going to do just a basic bind off in the 2x2 ribbing. So I'm going to knit the first stitch, knit the second stitch, and then pass that first stitch over the second. You don't want to do these bind offs too tight so that you can still get your wrist and your hand through that sleeve. Now I will do a purl, since that would be my next stitch, and pass the first stitch over, and then another purl, pass the first stitch over, and then a knit, and pass that first stitch over, and then another knit, and pass that first stitch over. So it's just a basic bind off in that 2x2 ribbing, and we will do that all the way around until all the stitches are bound off. So the last thing we need to do on this beautiful sweater summer top is to do the neck ribbing, because right now it is a bit wide. So we're going to start by picking up stitches, and I like to start on either side. That way it's just kind of an inconspicuous join. Now when it comes to picking up stitches, we often have a number of stitches we need to pick up, and then we start to worry if we're going to be picking up too many on one side or not enough on the other side. So a trick to picking up stitches is to grab some stitch markers, and if you're not sure how to keep them even, go ahead and mark it either at your halfway point or even mark it in fourths, and then you can simply divide the total number to know how many to be put either between 1/4 of the stitch markers or what should be on the front and what should be on the back. Now the back of this is really easy because we've got these stitches here that we did a bind off, so we can definitely see them. But on the front, it's a bit different since it's still in our design pattern repeat and the edges aren't quite as clear. So around the top neck, I have picked up 120 stitches, which is divisible by 4, so we can continue to do our 2x2 ribbing. Now it's time for me to work these stitches in the 2x2 ribbing for a total of 5 rounds. So after working those rounds, now it's time to bind off, and we are going to bind off in the 2x2 ribbing. I'm just going to do a basic bind off, but I'm going to continue to work in that 2x2 ribbing as I do this bind off. So if it's a purl stitch, you'll purl it and then pull the first loop over the second. And work this bind off all the way around. Don't make it too tight, so we want it to be flexible so that it can fit over our head. And now after binding off, I'm going to go ahead and fasten off my yarn and weave in all those ends, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to wear this one this summer. I really think that this is going on this weekend for sure. I absolutely love it. You can dress it up or dress it down. So this would be great for a date night, but also just simply a Saturday afternoon at the beach or the farmer's market or coffee with the girlfriends. I hope you join me again soon for another fun project. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and use the hashtag #BriannaKDesigns on social media so I can see all the beautiful things you're making. I absolutely love seeing your projects. Until next time.